The subject of today's video survived a hurricane when he was little, became a big-time football prospect, and was one of the future stars in the SEC. Unfortunately, he would run into trouble, get dismissed from school, and would have to make a name for himself at a junior college. He became a big-time deal and an inspiration on the famous TV show Last Chance U, and just like the show, he would use his last chance wisely as he would get one more opportunity to play in the SEC. From there, he'd have one of the best years in school history for any running back, and many saw him as a future NFL player. Unfortunately, he fell off in 2020, and combining that with some other factors, he may be done with football. So yeah, you may know who we are talking about in today's video, but we're going to go through his entire story, his collegiate career, and what has ultimately gone wrong for him. But right before we get into that, nearly 80% of you guys are not subscribed, and we are now on the road to 100K, so be sure to hit that button as I really appreciate it. And without further ado, let's get started. So at this point, you're probably wondering who the heck am I talking about, and it is none other than Arkansas running back Rakeem Boyd. He went to Texas A&M at first, but then went on to the junior college route where he was a star in Last Chance U, and then he saved his career at Arkansas. But before we can talk about what went wrong for him and his entire college career, we had to go back in time and see how Boyd became a big name to begin with. He ended up growing up in the state of Louisiana, but both him and his mom were eventually displaced by Hurricane Katrina all the way back in 2005. Boyd said, quote, "We were struggling. We didn't have much. Coming to Houston, it was starting back over again. We were starting life back over again. We had no money or no car, and my mom really had to get it as a single parent. I think that's what made me who I am today." Football would always become his outlet, as apparently he always had a pigskin in his hands, and it would be seen as an escape for him. The family would move to Texas, as I said, where he became a football superstar. He wasn't done with all the hurricanes though, as apparently the family went through Hurricane Harvey as well, but they were okay this time. At 6 foot 200 pounds, Boyd became a highly recruited player out of Houston Stratford High School, as he rushed for 6,436 yards and 80 touchdowns in his entire high school career there. He had offers from over 20 programs and was a borderline 4-star recruit, and it would ultimately come down to Texas A&M, Arizona State, Michigan, and Missouri. He eventually would decide to take his talents to Kevin Sumlin in the A&M Aggies, and he had this to say, quote, "The coaching staff and I just had a good relationship, and it felt right at home. Also, my type of ball in place to compete. The last big reason I went with the decision is the chance to play in the SEC. That's where I've always wanted to play. Most guys don't want to play in the SEC because they're scared to compete. I'm not. There it is." He said that in an interview back in the day when he committed to A&M, and he was a guy who was afraid of nothing. Scouts were also pretty high on the dude. According to 24/7 Sports, he was a high 3-star recruit, the number 24 running back, and the 447th best player in the class of 2016. One scout had this to say, quote, "He's the combination of strength and speed to be an every down workhorse back. Boyd also possesses the ability to be a playmaker as a receiver out of the backfield and can block when necessary as well." But yeah, he had a lot of hype going into Texas A&M, but how would it end up going for him? So yeah, he obviously started out at Texas A&M, where he would end up redshirting. In his second year, he would be hit with a curveball though, as he was dismissed from the team because of his grades. This was a very difficult moment for Rakeem, and he had this to say, quote, "I was crying, thinking about how I can't go to this school anymore, and I can't do this. That was going through my head. I was working on footwork drills the entire time, and I cried the whole time. I was sweating, and I couldn't even get tired. I worked so hard to get here." From there, he'd have to make a football decision, as he would go the junior college route and join up at Independence Community College. He would end up dominating at the JUCO level, rushing for 1,211 yards and 14 touchdowns, while averaging 6.3 yards per carry. That year, he even had a 303-yard performance in a win over Coffeyville Community College, and everyone in that show knew his name. He said it was like high school all over again, as they practiced in cornfields, and he absolutely hated the food. He had this to say about JUCO, "I had to sit a year basically in a jail cell, it felt like. I didn't get the right lunch, and I got cafeteria food like I was in middle school again. I ended up putting my head down and worked to get out of this." So yeah, he worked hard and inspired many people along the way, and would eventually take his talents to the SEC West. No, he was not going back to Texas A&M, but he went to one of their division rivals, Arkansas. He always said he wanted to play in the SEC, so he got his chance, and he decided to commit and play for Chad Morris. Going into Boyd's Arkansas career, they were under head coach Chad Morris, and unless you've been living under a rock, was arguably the worst Power 5 head coaching hire ever. The Razorbacks would struggle tremendously, but Boyd would be a bright spot in an otherwise cloudy, dark season. In his first game, he'd get a couple carries, but he'd go for 67 yards and a loss to Colorado State. He didn't appear in their loss to North Texas, and would not really have his first big game until a loss against number 1 Alabama. In that game, he went for over 100 yards, And the following week against Ole Miss, he had 109 yards and his first career touchdown. From there, he'd have a touchdown against Vanderbilt plus 113 yards, and then he would finish the year with nearly 100 yards and a loss to Mississippi State. The Razorbacks would go 2-10, but Boyd was a bright spot. He ran the ball for 734 yards and 2 touchdowns, while averaging 6 yards per carry, and also catching nearly 200 yards receiving out of the backfield. 2019 is when he would finally break out, as in his first game against Portland State, he'd go for over 100 yards and a touchdown. Arkansas would lose a close game to Ole Miss in week 2, and some thought maybe Chad Morris was turning the corner. They would beat Colorado State, and in that game, Boyd would have a career night, as he went for 122 yards and 2 touchdowns, and the Razorbacks were 2-1. Unfortunately, it would be nothing but downhill from there, as they lose to San Jose State at home, and then lost a close matchup with A&M, and they are now back under 500. Boyd went for a career-high 134 yards and 2 touchdowns in a close loss to Kentucky, but then the losses really started to pile up. They lost to Auburn, they got killed by Alabama, they lost to Mississippi State, lost to Western Kentucky, lost to LSU, and lost to Missouri. Boyd would play well in most of those games though, as he went for over 100 yards against Mississippi State, had 185 yards and 2 touchdowns against Western Kentucky, and also had 95 yards in a loss to Mizzou. Boyd became arguably one of the best running backs in the SEC, as he went for 1,133 yards and 8 touchdowns, and he was at least giving it his all. He could have potentially left for the 2020 NFL Draft, but he would decide to stick around one more year. The Razorbacks had fired Chad Morris halfway through the 2019 campaign and hired Georgia offensive line coach Sam Pittman to be the new head man. Personally, I was a little bit skeptical of this hire at first, but I quickly figured out why they wanted Pittman. Boyd would play in their first game against number 4 Georgia, but he was a non-factor. The following week, they would beat number 16 Mississippi State, but Boyd did not do a whole lot. He would rush for a touchdown against Ole Miss, but his first 3 games did not go very well. In a loss to number 8 Texas A&M, he went for 100 yards and a touchdown, and then against Tennessee, he had 65 yards, and at this point, Boyd's draft stock was falling. In his final game that he would ever play as a Razorback, he went for 56 yards and a touchdown against Florida, and then he would decide to opt out. He finished the 2020 campaign with 309 yards and 3 touchdowns, and to say this kind of ruined his football career a little bit is an understatement. Because of that, he would go undrafted in the 2021 NFL Draft, despite the running back class being pretty weak. Despite going undrafted, Boyd had a lot of gratitude, as he had this to say: "After all the stuff I've been through, my senior year here, Texas A&M, junior college, it's a blessing to be able to do what I love and do that to the best of my abilities. I thank the man above for helping me to keep going. You can ask anybody. I've been fighting so long to get to this point, and I'm finally here." Scouts were a little bit concerned about him though. They said he had a short step, but they were concerned with his pass protection skills, his 2020 production, and his struggles to pick up extra yards. So yeah, as I obviously stated earlier, he went undrafted, and he would get picked up by the Detroit Lions. They already had a couple backs on the team, and they drafted Jermar Jefferson in the 7th round, so the likelihood that Boyd would make the roster was pretty slim to begin with. Apparently he would miss the first 2 weeks of minicamp for an undisclosed injury, and because of that, they decided to waive him with an injury settlement. There is always a chance he returns to the team, however, that's not looking very likely. It'd be one thing if he was a first, second, or third round pick, but he is an undrafted free agent, and running backs are always replaceable in the NFL, and he needed a good rookie year to prove he could make it in the league. Now he's going to be fighting from practice squad to try to make a roster or get an opportunity, and he is so far behind the 8 ball, I don't think it's that likely. I absolutely love Rakeem Boyd, I love his story, and he's a great person, so I really do hope he gets on with the team, but to say I'm worried is a little bit of an understatement. The best thing he can do is put himself in the right situation, hope for a couple of injuries, and just keep working like he's always done, and he will get a chance someday. Either way, I don't know though. What do you guys think? Do you think Rakeem Boyd will ever play in the NFL again? What do you think of his story? Who should I do next? And who is the best running back in Arkansas history? Be sure to let me know the answers to all of those questions down in the comment section. Hit that like button if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you are new here, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.